Hi, my name's David Mallon, Vice President and Executive Analyst at Bersin by Deloitte, and I'm next on the RecTech podcast.
Welcome to RecTech, the podcast where recruiting and technology intersect. Each month, you'll hear from vendors shaping the recruiting world, along with recruiters who'll tell you how they use technology to hire talent. Now, here's your host, the mad scientist of online recruiting, Chris Russell.
That's right. It's time for RecTech, the only podcast that helps employers and recruiters connect with more candidates through technology-inspired conversations. If you listen, you'll hear both recruiters and HR tech vendors talk about how they use tech to find talent. But first, as always, this episode of RecTech is sponsored by Job Fairing, the job fair search engine. If your company is hosting a hiring event or a job fair soon, well, Job Fairing will help you promote that event to a local audience in your city. Submitting your event is free, but to also help you advertise it on channels like Facebook if you choose to feature it on their site. To ensure your hiring event is well attended, head over to jobfairing.com and get it listed. It's jobfairing.com. Now on to our guest. As their head of research, David Mallon sets strategy and drives innovation for Bersin's research team. He is the primary force behind their work in continuous learning cultures, and learning management systems. He's also central to the Bersin thought leadership related to HR's operating models, governance, and the evolution of key roles such as the HR business partner. David, it's good to have you at RecTech. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to first get your takeaways on this year's HR Tech Conference. I'm assuming you went, and tell me what's your thought coming away from that conference?
Sure. So yes, I was at the show in Las Vegas this year. I would say two words, neither of which maybe is new, but certainly were top of mind this year, and that is experience and personalization. Each year there's words that seem to be on everyone's lips, and in some cases so much that they get watered down almost to the point of being useless. I would say for the past few years, engagement would be top of that list. Every vendor solution was an engagement solution.
Yeah.
When you peel back that kind of marketing layer, what you see is that all the vendors are now telling you that they're squarely focusing on improving the experience for the end user, not just from sort of a traditional usability point of view, but what's different, and I guess my key takeaway, this notion of personalization and experience, is they're focused on it very much at a personal productivity point of view. Design thinking is another set of words we use a lot now in HR. It's a set of principles, it's methods. There's lots of ways to think about it, but common to them all is this notion of empathy, sort of walking in the shoes of the audience, of seeing through their eyes. And I think that's what you're seeing at HR Tech and in just HR technology in general, is this inflection point to where we're now focused squarely on how do we create these compelling, productive experiences for our workforces to make it frictionless, to make it easy to work with us in HR. We've talked for a few years in our research in L&D around this notion of a invisible L&D function. What happens if L&D was doing its job so well, if it was anticipating needs, if it was staging opportunities, support systems so well, that employees didn't even notice it was there. They didn't notice that when they turn the lights on, the lights come on, right? No one thinks about how it works. That's what's happening. And it only happens when HR and its ecosystem of vendors are truly focused on this personalization, at getting to know the target workforces at a far more granular and intimate level than they ever have before. So certainly, it's kind of like there's a very well-known online commerce company based here in Seattle that collects as much data as possible, makes it as easy as possible, caters and customizes the experiences and the solutions and products as possible, such that you don't even realize that all of this stuff is happening in the background, and yet you have a much more personally compelling and ultimately productive experience.
Well, it's good to finally see user experience, taking hold in HR, which I think was long overdue. So I think we're on our way. David, there's some recent news this week in your space. Some pretty big funding news, I thought, which was Cornerstone On Demand receiving $300 million in new funding, which I think LinkedIn was also involved with. What was your initial reaction to all that?
It's interesting. The learning technology space just sort of continues to amaze me and us collectively. I think Josh Bersin has some data recently that showed that in the overall spending on HR technology, that more of that's going into learning than in any other part of the pie. It's not surprising, and yet it's puzzling on some level, because we talk to lots of companies, and there's a general dissatisfaction with where we've been in learning technology, which is primarily the learning management system, the LMS. Mm-hmm. Yet companies are starved for not talent overall, but the right talent. They're starved for people with a certain set of experiences, certain set of expertise. And there is a general recognition that you can't hire your way out of that. So getting the right people, maximizing their productivity, and keeping them engaged, keeping them productive. This requires an ever-expanding focus on development and on career. And yes, there are certainly these established big fish in the market, the LMS vendors who have been there for a while, and Cornerstone's one, and they're kind of caught up in all of this. And I think Cornerstone's just doing, obviously, an effective job of building on to that they have an established position. They have lots of customers, relationships, a sales force, and yet they're able to build onto that platform and then grow into these new areas of recognizing this new demand for something different, for this experience I was talking about, for a platform approach to how we develop people, not just a solution where we put courses and classes out there, a mobile, micro-learning, nudging, and growing into things like augmented reality, where all of these things collectively are about, again, how do we help you, employee, grow in your job right now and in your career tomorrow without it actually taking you out of your job today or where you're going tomorrow.
Interesting. Were you surprised at all that LinkedIn was involved in this announcement as well? I mean, aren't they kind of competitors a little bit?
Well, I think that, but you're seeing them engage with many of the vendors in this space. And it gets back to, again, this sort of notion of sort of personalization. They bring a established data set about the people that work for you, their backgrounds, their interests, where they're at today and where they're going, et cetera. And they can layer, and they make it much easier then to layer on top of that what they might be interested in from a content perspective, literally what content or courses or classes they would be interested in. And then I think almost more importantly, from a networking perspective, since so much of what drives learning is exposure, is knowing who to know, knowing who to be known by, knowing who to follow, who to emulate, who to build, who to be sponsored by or mentored by or what have you. They bring that natural source of those relationships as well. Interesting.
Okay. Let's switch gears a bit and talk about applicant tracking systems if we could. Your colleague, Josh Bersin, as you mentioned, said something recently that caught the eye of some recruiters I know, something to the effect of the ATS is going away or dying. I wonder if you can comment on that. What does he mean by that, and do you agree?
Well, I think it's just a manifestation of the thread I've been on today of experience and personalization in talent acquisition. Think about what the applicant tracking system does. It's transactions, it's efficiencies. It's about helping the TA function, the coordinators and recruiters and so on. It's helping them do their job better and at scale. It has nothing to do with the candidate. That's not going to cut it, given the general push of how the workforce and workplace is going and how the HR technology is going. And so it's being replaced by this notion of the candidate experience. And its very public measure and face the employment brand. These things are everything. So what's happening is what ATS does is just being put in its place, not so much disappearing as just being recognized as just one small part of this chain. Yes, we need to track these sorts of transactions, but it's not the centerpiece of what we're doing here. We need the candidate relationship management system, which connects to an ecosystem of other kinds of wider tools around recruitment marketing, around sourcing. How do we improve the conversations that are happening back and forth with candidates all along the chain? And given that TA says no a whole lot more than it says yes, how do we treat the no's with a level of respect by trying to get them as much information as possible? And so you see this ecosystem of tools and so forth around around conversations, around the experience, ultimately.
Gotcha. So the new acronym is basically going to be CRM, ATS.
That's right. Well, for now.
There's never been more HR technology than exists right now, David. And the money is just flowing to the space, by the bucket load, it seems. Are we in any kind of an HR tech funding bubble here? I mean, there's just so much out there. What do you think?
I'm not sure if it's a bubble. I think companies are buying. They're feeling this pain of having so many existing systems that were built for this era before focus on experience and personalization, and they definitely want something else. So, I mean, right now, it's not like there aren't buyers. But of course, I would say the economy is doing okay overall as well. So there's money to spend, there's money to even experiment in some cases. And there's always this pendulum in software, in business software, HR just being part of it, where we shift back and forth between when those moments where everyone wants that best point solution and they're willing to have it in an ecosystem, versus when they absolutely just want to drive towards one magic suite that has all of these things. And I think right now, obviously, we're at the point solution end of things. Are we at the peak and we're ready to go back? I'm not sure yet, but my guess is probably not quite. But I think that's more of what's going on now than necessarily a bubble. I think the barriers to entry in business software in general, because of things like cloud, just make it very easy for new providers to pop up all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that's going to change.
As far as implementing all this HR technology, I still hear stories of just employers doing it wrong. I mean, at the conference, I sat down next to a recruiter and I said, "Okay, what's your ATS?" That's one of my favorite questions to ask them. And she said, "Cats." I said, "Okay." And then, but then she goes on to say that other divisions in her company had just implemented Workday, but that she was afraid to actually switch over to Workday because she said that they didn't include me on any of the workflow stuff, and when they were building it out. And I'm like, really? It's like, I don't know whose fault it was, whether it was the vendor or the consultant or whoever, but I just hear too many of those stories still coming out of HR. I mean, what do you hear, and what's your thoughts on that?
Of course, but I think it's a fundamental problem. I think changing mindsets, changing why we work, not so much how we work, is so much harder than, and always been harder than changing process, changing technology, right? And it's also much harder to build a business case around that sort of change. Companies feel these sorts of pain. They feel this need to, quote unquote, transform in whatever part of the spectrum we're talking about. But the only way they can justify the time and the money to purchase this, to make the investments, to implement or to make major change, is to buy these big pieces of technology. And since that's difficult in and of itself, and it's what the business case is attached to, the technology quickly sort of sucks the oxygen out of the room and leaves very little space for doing the real change work, for changing those minds and mindsets. You talked about an ATS example. I would say you look around HR tech and you still see one of the single biggest examples of that is in the world of performance management. It's gotten so much attention. We have so many companies rushing to abandon their traditional processes for good reasons. They feel this pain. They feel that these existing processes are time-consuming. They're disconnected from actual performance. They're harmful to employee engagement at all. But the pain isn't the process, and it certainly wasn't necessarily the technology that you were using to drive that process. The pain is an underlying problem, which is how we design and assign and monitor and improve work, and our workforce is out of step with how it actually works in the real world today. It's not fast enough. It's not interactive enough. It's not personalized enough. And so, not surprisingly, we're starting to hear lots of organizations that went down this road really fast and have tried to do new things with performance. They abandoned their old process. They bought some new technology, and they're no different because they didn't actually stop to think about the root cause, which is we need to think about how we do work and then work from there. Yeah.
I also think, too, that a lot of HR leaders they don't understand what the technology can do for them when they go look at this stuff.
That's right. We often try to. A classic problem is that we try to do old things in new boxes with new technologies, and not realizing those new technologies actually allow us to go different directions.
Last question for today as I wrap this up. And predictions for 2018. What are you expecting to be talking about next year's HR Tech and in this space?
I think it may be a somewhat pat answer, but I think a simple answer is just sort of more of the same. I do think you'll see a continued rise in us talking about cognitive technologies, robotic process automation, AI, machine learning, etc. The kind of personalization I've been talking about, this very personal focus on productivity, not at the level of designing for, let's say, a half dozen personas, but at the scale of actually trying to design different experiences for each of your thousands of employees. That requires a lot of data, and it requires a lot of analysis of data, and it requires a lot of interactions around that data. And I think that's where you're starting to see we as humans need help. So you're going to see more of on the interface side, you're going to see more of the chatbots and the personal assistants and so forth coming to HR. Certainly on the automation side, you're going to see all sorts of uses of RPA to free up the recruiter to be more focused on relationships, the learning function to be more focused on performance in the moment, and so on. And then, AI, machine learning, pattern recognition, decision making, et cetera. How do we make the employee's life more productive without really actually having to take them out of whatever it is they're doing? You're going to see all those sorts of technologies play out.
Yeah, here come the HR robots, right?
That's right.
Nice. Well, Dave, thanks for joining me. Tell people how to connect with you and Bersin online.
Just check us out at Bersin.com.
Well, that will do for this edition of the RegTech Podcast. Thanks again to our sponsor. Remember to check out Job Fairing for your next hiring event. You can subscribe to the show via iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, and now Stitcher Radio. Hey, if you like the show, please leave a review on your channel of choice. I'd love to see your feedback or mention us on social media with the hashtag RegTech. Follow me on Twitter at Chris Russell or visit regtechmedia.com, where you can find the audio and links for this show on our blog. Thanks for listening.